Welcome to the HCI family of podcasts. We're your source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development. We share our own original research, explore industry trends, and interview executives and thought leaders from across the globe. Join us for practitioner-oriented content around all things leadership, HR, talent management, organizational development, and change management. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with the HCI family of podcasts. Cyriel Kortleven, welcome to the conversation today.
I'm very happy to be here, John. Looking forward to this.
It is a pleasure to be with you. You're joining us from Belgium. I'm south of Salt Lake City in Utah. And today we're going to be talking about making change simple. I love that. I love the simple framing. I love the idea of making change simple. The reality is we all live in this crazy world. It's increasingly complex, messy, nuanced. The rate and pace of change around us seems to be ever increasing, almost at an exponential rate. And so amidst all this complexity, I think there's always this temptation to just feel bogged down, to feel weighted down, and then to try to latch on to all these different framings and models. And while frameworks can be helpful, oftentimes they really do become, overly complex. A lot of times they do become less helpful just because they take us down paths that more complex than they need to be. And so this idea of keeping change simple, doing the basic things consistently well over time, I think is really what we all need to hear. So I'm excited to explore this with you today. As we get started, I wanted to share Cyriel's bio with everybody. For more than 20 years, Cyriel Kortleven has been inspiring organizations like IKEA, NASA, and Unilever to approach change with courage, confidence, and enthusiasm. His programmatic advice has earned him the nickname of Simplifier. In an increasingly complex world, we need new, simple perspectives to enable us to navigate uncertainty and to turn problems into opportunities. And so today we're going to be talking about practical tips and tools to help all of you as a leader to drive behavioral change. Cyriel, anything you would like to add by way of your background, personal context before we dive on in?
No, this is perfect. People can look up my name and they find a lot of stuff, but I totally agree with you. I think we human beings have a tendency to make things sometimes too complex. So if we can give some tips and tricks to make change a little bit easier, yeah, I'm very happy to do that.
So I know one of the things you often talk about is the change mindset. I also think this is hugely important, in part because we historically, traditionally, we talk about change process. We talk about change initiatives. I think that's still important, change management, change process, all of those things. But again, given the rate and pace of change and that changes all around us all the time, making a shift from like a discrete change initiative or process into change mindset seems rather important to me. Can you tell us what that means to you and why you feel that's so important?
Yeah, absolutely. What you see is indeed a lot of models, a lot of theories on how can we streamline the whole change management a little bit better. But for me, it starts with the person, and mindset for me can be the head and it can be the heart. I think we have to touch people, their personalities, because it changes from person to person. Some people, they love to change some things. For them, it's a little bit easier. Other people go into resistance. So one of the quotes that I really like and use several times is, "Don't mind the change your mind." And what do I mean by that? If something is changing, we focus all our time, energy, money on the thing that is changing, which makes sense. If there is a new software system, we want to give people training, we communicate on the new software. But what we sometimes forget is that we can also help people in coping with that change. And then if we focus a bit more on how can we make it a little bit easier for people, how can we take away some resistance, how can we give them a bit more trust that they can do it, then it doesn't really matter what the change is. They will be better. They have better tools to start working with the change. So I think probably we still need to focus 90% on the change itself, the element that's changing, but maybe we should focus 10% on more helping people to cope with change, making them aware of their own unconscious thinking, that we human beings, we love to stay and stick to the status quo. But yeah, we need to change because the outside world, like you're saying, is changing really quickly. So for me, to change mindset are some simple principles that we can apply to, yeah, to make change a little bit easier.
Yeah. Well, and like you said, resistance to change is one of the biggest, threats to any change initiative.
Yeah,
It's what every leader knows, and any change practitioner, any leader who has tried to lead change initiatives knows that resistance to change is in creating buy-in from various
yeah,
stakeholders within the organization. Like that's one of the biggest hurdles to be able to drive success and sustainability and to have meaningful, measurable impact over time. Like you have to do that, otherwise you're not going to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish, right?
yeah,
And I think a lot of times leaders look past it because they just think, we're in charge. We tell our employees what to do. We're going to, adopt this new software. We're going to change this process, put in place this new policy. We're going to do whatever. We're going to roll it out. We're going to tell them how it's going to be, and it's just going to
yeah,
happen. And I mean, that's just so naive. If that's kind of what you think, I mean, you can think that all you want, but it's incredibly naive to think that it's actually just going to work that way because that's not how humans work. There's always resistance.
yes,
There's always going to be a buy-in issue, and unless you can generate that, you're going to have trouble. And so, this change mindset piece is so incredibly important for any resilient change kind of culture to permeate within an organization. And again, we're not talking like, I mean, maybe 20, 30 years ago, we could get away with,
yeah,
every so often having like a big change push, a change initiative,
yes,
but we're not there now. Like it seems like it's constant. And so if we're truly in a place where
yeah,
it's almost constant, what are we going to do if people have constant either resistance or change fatigue or any of those sorts of things? We're just never going to get to where we need to be.
no, I absolutely agree. And one important element is a lot of times the leaders, they already thought about the change that they want to achieve. So they're already busy with it, also in their minds,
Yes.
already for months. And then they announce it and they are amazed that people are having resistance and they don't get it. And it has also something to do with our, you already said it, our unconscious mind. We human beings, if somebody says something that's a little bit different than what we've normally done, we go into resistance, and I call those idea killers. Yeah, and people
Hmm.
can't see it, but what I've done in Belgium, we love or beers. So we created some coasters with a red side and a green side. On the red side, you have all kind of expressions, what I call the idea killers. So somebody wants to change something, and then it happens. Yes, but we don't have money, we don't have time, we've already tried it. And in our country, it's different. And a lot of times there is a reason behind it and there is a little bit of a truth behind it, but a lot of times it comes too early. So my first step, and it's such a simple step, but I think it's crucial if you want to engage people in change process, is can we go for a moment, they call it the 3-minute rule, can we go for 3 minutes from a yes but to a yes and?
Yeah.
So maybe in a meeting you have 10 agenda points. I would say 9 of them logical thinking, but maybe there is one agenda point where you could use some creativity, where you want that people have a little bit less resistance to the possible outcomes. And then I invite them, okay, let's go for 3 minutes. It's a little experiment. You can't say yes, but. If there is somebody who says yes, but, you get the red card, yeah, like in soccer in Europe. Red card, what does it mean? You killed one idea. The punishment is you have to come up with 2 new ones. So what I'm trying to do is create a very safe, playful environment where people are allowed to think a little bit further. And they don't have to do everything, but at least giving them a safe space to think a little bit broader already helps to take away a little bit of the resistance. So I think that's certainly a lesson that every leader should know, and help your people, help your people with becoming aware that we have resistance, and there's nothing wrong with that, but how can we look at it from different angles?
Yeah, yeah. And I just want to reemphasize that being aware that we all have it, that there's nothing wrong with having it. It is human nature. Like
Yes.
literally it's hardwired into our brains. It's evolutionary psychology. There's a reason why we're programmed that way, why our brains are set up that way.
Yeah,
It helped us survive, in the wild.
absolutely.
Like as we were amongst the beasts, and like we had to protect ourselves and in clans and all of that, right? But we're not in that situation anymore. And
Yeah.
so that doesn't always serve us as well as it may have 10,000 years ago. And
Yeah.
so now we need to recognize that that still is there. And sometimes it still serves a purpose, but
Yeah,
oftentimes,
absolutely.
oftentimes it that resistance creates that fight or flight kind of response
Yes.
more than necessary. And so if we recognize that, then we have control over what our response is to it. And we
Yes.
can kind of retrain our response to it over time.
Yeah, and you can play a little bit. I see it as becoming aware, because a lot of us, and even I am already working for more than 20 years in this domain, I still say yes, but a
Mhm.
lot, if a new situation happens. So becoming aware of it, that's absolutely step number one. And then you can start playing, hey, wait a minute, what if I go one step further? What if this would be possible? And then the what if questions can come, but it starts with indeed with awareness, and being open to dare from look at the world from different sides. Sometimes you have a tendency to focus on a problem from one point of view, depending on the role that you have. So as a leader, this is the direction where we want to go, this is what we have to do. But sometimes we forget, hey, wait a minute, maybe my employees or my colleagues are looking at it from a completely different angle, and starting to understand that there are different angles. And it doesn't mean that you have to change your own perspective, but at least be a bit more open. You have more options. You can go in more directions.
Yeah, yeah. So recognizing that first and foremost is important. Then we have more power over it, like power control over what our response is.
Yes.
We can choose more. What can we do as leaders? What can we do as HR professionals to help, boost this change mindset, to help our people, members of our teams, to help people in the organization to develop this kind of change mindset so we're more resilient to change that's happening around us, and we can mitigate or diminish the resistance to change.
Indeed, starting with bringing that awareness. So one of the tips that I would give is maybe every meeting, the last 3 minutes or 5 minutes, play around a little bit with those idea killers. Let's just to make people aware that we have them. And if we train them, it becomes a little bit easier to come up with a bit more creative ideas. So that's one. A second thing, what I also advise a lot of times to HR people or leaders in general, is helping people to look at the world from different angles. So asking a question like, for example, you're working in marketing, hey, how would somebody from the logistical department, what would they do to solve this problem? Or somebody from legal or administration? Or you could even go a few steps further to say, hey, wait a minute, we're now, for example, in the US. How would a different country, what would they do if they had a challenge like us? How would they solve it in Belgium or New Zealand or whatever? And what happens is by putting on a different hat, or at least steering us in a certain direction by asking those questions, immediately our brain is triggered to look at it from a different angle. And that will also help to yeah, to make people a bit more resilient to the change that are happening. And maybe step three, and maybe that's one of the most important ones, is allow people to do more experiments.
Yes.
I have a
Yeah.
feeling that we try to control everything. So what do? There is a mistake, and we come up with a new rule and a new procedure and a new way of working, and we're making it more complex and complex instead of. And I totally get it. If there is a danger involved, we have to try to control it and do double checks. But in a lot of cases, if it is just a thinking exercise, please allow people to test some things in a small way, do an experiment. If you want to, for example, a question that I get a lot is that people say, "Yeah, we should cross borders. We have to work together with the different departments," and you can come up with a whole program trying to do it. Or you could say, "Hey, next week, everyone, you get 1 hour free time. Just visit the department that you don't really know, and you are allowed to go and sit in that meeting, and maybe you learn something." I
Hmm.
think that approach will bring a lot more movement, a lot more action than trying to come up with a theoretical plan. And maybe it works or doesn't work, but that doesn't really matter. You started to move, and I'm quite sure you learn more from reality if you really put something in action in the real world than trying to do it in your head. So allow people a little bit more experiments and accept the small failures, learn from it.
Yeah, I completely agree. I love the experimentation idea because you have to create the psychological safety for people to speak up. You have to create the safety for people to be willing to try things, to experiment. And if you want people to if you want to break down resistance to change, if you want people to embrace a change mindset, first and foremost, you have to encourage people to be curious, right?
Yes.
You have to encourage people to think outside of the status quo, to think outside of the everyday. You're never going to get people to embrace the new unless they're thinking about
Yeah.
possibility, right? And so many organizations are so locked down into compliance with
Yes.
the current status quo, that, like, no wonder when some change initiative happens, it's so hard to get people there because you've been drilling into them
Yes.
constantly for the past year about compliance, compliance, compliance. And oh, by the way, here's the stick that we're going to hit you with if you deviate in the smallest little centimeter, away from
Yes.
this compliance. And then now all of a sudden we're telling you to switch gears and
Yeah.
go a completely different direction. And you think it's just going to naturally happen.
Mm,
People,
mm,
we've
mm.
already talked about, like, from an evolutionary psychology standpoint, people already resist change. You add on
Yes.
top of that the fact that you've been hammering over people's heads that they need to be doing it one specific way, and now you're telling them to change it. Like, of course, it's not going to be smooth sailing. So if you can break down that compliance culture into more of a psychologically safe, um,
Yes.
uh, courageous experimentation culture, oh my goodness, now all of a sudden
Yeah.
people are curious and they're just exploring, and you've taken away the stigma around failure. Failure isn't trying something and it not working. Failure is trying something and not learning from it, and trying something and doing the same thing wrong over and over again, right? It's not trying something and not having it work the first time. Literally learning means we're probably not going to do it right the first time, and so we have to allow for that. And if we don't, no change initiative is ever going to be successful. I don't know a single change initiative in any organization, from
No.
the simplest change initiative all the way to the most complex, where everything has gone perfectly smooth,
Nope.
completely as expected from the very beginning to the very end. That doesn't happen. That's not a thing.
It's part of the process. If you want to learn something new, you have to try it a few times. Maybe what could be interesting also for the listeners, what we've done together with a group of people, because failure, it still has a negative connotation. We
Yeah.
say, hey, fail fast, fail often, fail forward. But we came up with a new word, and that word is the word nearling. So nearling
Uh,
is a word that doesn't exist yet in English. But what is a nearling? It's something that you've done with the right intention, which has not yet led to the right result. So
mhm.
we could say we think quite binary. We do something and it works. That's one, that's a success. We do something that doesn't work, that's a zero. That's a failure. What would be a nearling? A nearling would be the zero point 0.1, the zero point 0.3, the zero point 0.9. You tried something, you moved a few steps further, but then at the end, the marketing manager is saying, no, we can't do this, because there's some law. Then you could say the whole project has failed. No, we had a nearling. We already learned a lot of things, and we learned a lot more than the person who's still sitting behind the desk trying to come up with the perfect plan. And
Exactly.
that's, I
Yeah.
think, what people need. We need to get more into action, I guess.
Yeah, I love that. I love that idea. And it's true. Like you are far closer to solutions when you're trying things and they're not quote unquote they're not working than the
Yeah.
person who's sitting behind their desk thinking about it, trying to come up with the perfect plan. Building the plane while you're flying it, so to speak. It's messy.
Yeah.
Things aren't going to work. The pieces are going to fall off while you're, flying overhead, whatever. But guess what? You're going to be far further along. You're much further along in terms of having a working prototype than people
Yes.
who are just sketching stuff at their desk, people who are just thinking about it, because you're living it, because you're applying it, because you're testing it.
And
Hopefully
take
that's
small
obvious to
steps.
everybody. Hopefully
Yeah.
that's obvious to everybody. But the lived reality doesn't always connect with the conceptualization, right? Like
Yes.
so often we may know that, but it doesn't play out with how organizations function because we get too scared about
Yeah.
looking dumb. We get scared
Yes.
about, how are we going to explain this to our boss when we try something and it didn't work or whatever.
And I would say add to that, make it small, make it small and safe. A lot of times, if you want to test out a certain situation, you don't need to change the whole organization.
Hey,
You
yeah.
can start with a small department. You can try it out in a few safe cases just to learn. I totally agree. The experimenting and learning, it's connected. We can't move forward if we don't learn from some mistakes.
As we start to wrap up today, there's so many elements of change. We've talked about resistance, we've talked about experimentation culture, staying curious. We've talked about all these sorts of things. If you were to leave the audience with one kind of tidbit, one nugget about making change simple, as we start to wrap things up, what would that be?
If it really comes down to action, I would share the word. It's even not a word. What do I mean with three S's? And the S stands for, can you make it specific? If you want to
Mm,
change something, the more specific you can make it, the better. Can you make it small? And can you make it smooth? Can you already think about how can I take away some resistance? So for every change project, what you're doing, think about it. Is it specific enough? Because if it is very specific, our unconscious mind wouldn't go into resistance because it's very specific. If it is very small, it is easier. And if you already think about how can I take away some of the resistance, how can I make it a bit more smooth, that would help. So I would say the yes and definitely try that in the next meeting and apply the S for the concrete actions. And you will notice that change will be a little bit easier.
Well, this has just been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much, Cyril. As we wrap up, I wanted to give you a chance to share with the audience how they can connect with you, find out more about your work, your team, and then if you have any other final word.
Perfect. Yeah, I think we could go on with this chat for a few hours, but I totally understand that we also need to respect the time of people. What I would say, if you want to know a little bit more about me, look my name up. My name will be in the podcast, Cyriel Kortleven on LinkedIn. There you can already find a lot of stuff. If you would like to have some of those idea killers, if you just go to ideakillers.net, you can already download it in, I think, 15 or 16 different languages. So that's a
Mm.
little bit a side hobby of mine. So you can download a PDF. And for the people really working in HR, I have collected in the previous years more than 50 examples of what can HR learn from different industries and domains. So I collected all kind of examples, even some crazy ones like what can HR learn from the mafia, or what can HR learn from a submarine. Feel free, send me an email, and I'm very happy to send you that booklet. Thank you, John.
Thank you so much, Cyriel. It's been a real pleasure. I encourage the audience to reach out, get connected, find out more about what Cyriel can do for you. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great week. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the podcast. We hope you stay healthy and safe, and please join us again soon.